If you could pinpoint highlights of your career, 3 or 4 highlights of your career, what would they be?
To ask me what are the highlights of my career is a difficult question, I think, to answer because I mean, first of all, I will say without question that I'm always amazed that when you press the trigger on a shutter and when you develop the film, that a picture is there. That's what got me interested in photography in the first place when this happened. And I was just naive enough, I suppose, not to let it go past me. It intrigued me, and I became interested in producing pictures. And I'm still amazed that what comes out in that film. And to ask me what are the highlights of my career, I can only say that, of course, working for Life magazine was a very fortunate thing for me. We worked well together, and I aimed at, from the time I saw the first Life magazine in Cairo in 1940, I said that's where I should be. I think like they think, and I just couldn't. In fact, I couldn't sort of believe it when I saw the magazine. I couldn't put it down. I couldn't put it down for 2 or 3 days, and I decided then and there that that's where I should go. And so my aim centered on doing that.
What was Life doing then?
It was showing pictures of Karl Maidans taken in Finland, and I think that story set me off because he was doing exactly what I would have done, I think. And I mean, I recognized myself, I recognized my own aims, as against what other photographers were doing at that time, including the photographers in the Middle East, which was taking a picture of the general and people shaking hands and you know, the sort of the newspaper, what was then the newspaper picture, the hometown picture, with names underneath. And
if you could describe what type of photography Life was doing that caught your eye.
It was Life. I picked up Life magazine, and here's Karl Maidans' pictures of the Finnish soldiers dying in the snow, and he had managed to get up to the front there, and was a real pioneer in this documentary type photography where you didn't photograph generals particularly, you photographed people, and you photographed what they were doing, and you didn't photograph what you thought they should be doing, you photographed what they did, and you became a photojournalist. Instantly you had you know, instantly this got through to your skull. You had become a photojournalist without knowing it, and that wasn't even a term in those days. And when I picked up, I was doing this in the Middle East, but I was working for the Australian Ministry of Information, and they didn't want that sort of a picture. They wanted pictures that they could send to hometown newspapers of 3 soldiers in a row in the same town with their names underneath, shaking hands or something or other. And I'd never worked for a newspaper. In fact, I'd never worked commercially as a photographer. I'd sort of got myself into this job with in one way and another, but I was not really a professional photographer. But I was given the job because the Prime Minister of Australia listened to what I had to say, which was what I'm telling you about what I saw in Life magazine. I wanted to document the fight. I'd looked at Flaherty's documentary movies, Man of Iran and Nanook of the North, and the wonderful guy from Canada who was doing the same thing, McLaughlin, I think his name was. And I had become very involved with a few friends in looking at these movies and feeling that this was the way photography had to go, away from the salon look. And so when I saw Life magazine, there it was, and it just startled the hell out of me. And I didn't cease trying to get there, to get on that staff until, and it was a matter of a year and less than a year and a half, and it was a lot, yes, it was about a year and a half, and I was working for them. And that took a little bit of doing from the middle of the Middle East somewhere when I was working for the Australians. But that was the most fortunate thing that happened to me in my life, because we, as you can have seen from any pictures you see of mine, we really worked with each other very, very well. And with not just the results in the magazine, the people that worked for Life, we all understood each other. It was a wonderful feeling, camaraderie.
Now, did Life create the photo essay? Was this what you?
As far as I know, they did. Yes. I think. Well, I mean, you know, if you start really researching something down to its very end, you find that nobody ever invented anything, and that what you're doing is improving, and maybe creating a new form. And I mean, Picasso didn't invent painting; he invented new forms of painting, new looks in painting, and that's what Life did. And I mean, there was Picture Post, there was other magazines long before Life, but they tended to Picture Post, or they tended to cover the empire more with illustrations, pictures being used as illustrations rather than the photo essay that Life developed.
Let's talk about your role as a war photographer for Life magazine. What was it that was driving you to take these pictures? It's like another question?
No, I mean, why did you're really asking me why I enjoyed being taking pictures during the war, which I did. And I think I know the answers to that. I'm not sure they're correct. I was not a commercial photographer before the war started. I was working in a photographic shop selling cameras. But I had become very involved using these cameras. When I went skiing or yacht racing or fishing or surfing, I'd take a camera with me and take pictures, and I became a pretty damn good photographer. So when the war started in 1939, I'm in New Zealand. The war started for us in September 1939. Well, they gave us 3 months to join up, or we were drafted. Everybody between the age of 18 and 45, and I was 21. And I wrestled with this problem, wrestled with it, and I figured that I'd been asked to join the Air Force, and with the idea of being a fighter pilot, because I was a top skier in New Zealand, I was asked to go in the Navy with the idea of being a motor torpedo boat skipper, because I was a skipper of a sailboat, and that's the sort of people they wanted, you know. And they really came after us, and this scared the hell out of me, because I figured that I really wasn't, that I'd be a coward. And which, as what I've discovered since, is what practically every young man faced with the same question feels. When the draft card comes, he almost passes out with being scared that you'd be a coward. And to get away from being a coward, I figured if I could be a photographer, I wouldn't have to, go to the front like this. Well, of course, the opposite happened, because the moment that I succeeded in becoming a photographer, and because of the pictures I'd taken in New Zealand, that were pretty dynamic pictures. I don't have any of them left; they're all gone. But they were dynamic pictures, and because I was using small cameras, and people were still using nothing but 4, 5, and 8, 10 cameras. So I brought a whole new point of view of New Zealand to anybody that looked at my pictures. And so when I explained this, when I went to Australia and explained this in Canberra to the ministers, that I really wanted to photograph the troops of what they went through, and and I literally said, and maybe helped to stop wars, which is the ultimate crusader. And at age 21, you'd better have a crusade or you're never going to get anywhere. I mean, let's put it this way, I say that everybody should have at least one crusade in their life. And that was mine. The war became my crusade. I didn't intend to be up the front. I took that job to try and get out of being in the fighting. I finished up being more fighting than as much fighting as the soldiers, because I was in the war for 1939 till it finished in 45, and I'd covered an awful lot of combat.
Now, Margaret Burke White said that you were one of the two best war photographers that there ever was. Is that, was there a competition among life photographers out there?
Oh yes, there certainly was competition, and seeing your stuff on the pages of the magazine, the ego was enormous. I mean, I was a little boy from New Zealand, and to see and I wanted to be a photographer. I seriously wanted to be a photographer. I just didn't go into the war not wanting to be a photographer. I might have misstated that. What I wanted to be was a photographer anyhow, and then I made use of this to to become a war photographer. And to see your stuff suddenly used with your byline on it in this magazine certainly spurred me on, and it spurred me on undoubtedly to do things to match Karl Maidan's, and which I think I did, and he knows it, and he knows that it was his pictures that brought me here in the first place, and we've always been very good friends. When he was released by the Japanese, and came back on the Grips home to New York in '42, he arrived here just a few days after I arrived here from Australia. And I was now back from the Middle East and Australia when Life hired me. And so we met at the Time Life office when they brought him to the Time Life, he and Shelley, and we met for the first time. And we've been very close friends, of course, ever since.
Was Life's photography during World War II, did Life have an editorial purpose with World War II?
Did Life have an editorial purpose in World War IV? Oh, sure, they would like to help win the war, no question. Oh, we all did. I mean, the pictures. Life was not an arm of the WWII, which was to a great extent to comfort people at home. Life was there to tell the truth, and it shook loose a lot of things, like the first Dead and things like that. Shook loose a lot of things that would never go past censorship if it had been merely trying to placate the public and comfort the mothers. It showed the truth, and this is why the photographers were not afraid to work, because they knew that if when they ventured in and into great difficulties at times, got shot at and even hurt, that if they came out of there with the truth, it would get used. What they said, and this is a lot of confidence. The magazines had a lot of confidence in us. Helped our egos, helped us produce, drove us on.
Let's talk about, the wonderful issue or essay that you did on the wilderness and photography of nature and things like that. And this was an issue. This essay, is that right? Won you the award. Is that right?
Yeah, that was part of the award. Yeah.
What was it about animals or nature that Life magazine wanted to show? Why were they covering it? As simple as that.
Well, that issue was the issue was to be about Outdoors, North America. It was a Christmas issue, a double issue, and it was to be about the outdoors the outdoors. And within that issue, someone said, well, you know, we've got to have the animals. And so I was asked if I would like to attempt it. People generally thought it was impossible to do it in the time frame that was left, which was less than 2 months to produce it. And they had a wonderful woman in the nature department who set me up with contacts all over the country, and I took off just a couple of days later. And these wonderful contacts that she had made enabled me to bring me to these positions where I could make contact and then do my thing.
Did life like to cover animal stories?
Oh, I think so, yes. Everybody loves animals, don't they? And animals were, but this was a specific thing on North American animals to go with the North American outdoors, you see, and well, I mean, there's one picture has a fish in it, and you might say, well, that's not an animal, but I mean, being a fisherman, I couldn't possibly let the story of the outdoors go without being a rainbow trout in. This is where rainbow trout come from. They're all over the world, been shipped all over the world. They're shipped to my native country of New Zealand, where I caught them when I was a small boy, and huge ones, this big, and so I just felt that trout had to be in, and so that I came up with that idea myself entirely of getting a trout under the water. And at first I just tried to get a view above the water, like the Tetons, but it didn't work. It wasn't enough, and it didn't work, and it didn't work. And I finally discovered that I found a place where I discovered it was just full of deer, and so I made this setup, and succeeded. It took me 3 weeks to get that picture, and it took 3 weeks out of my 2 months in doing this story, just getting that one picture. But as you can see, it's probably worth it.
On that note, let's talk about innovations. Phil Kuhnhart had said that you were a true innovator when it came to photography. Let's talk about that.
Well, I mean, and indeed, I did innovate, and the picture of the trout and deer was in order to make that work, I had to get a camera under the water, but if I'd just taken a camera under the water and photographed the trout, I wouldn't have had any great picture. That was nothing new. And so thinking about it, working at it, and making little sketches in airplanes, I came up with the idea of above and below the water. And so I became, and it worked. And you asked me, you might ask me, well, your pictures show you were an innovator. Why were you an innovator? My answer would be very simply that I was bored to tears with taking what was considered the regular pictures, the regular stuff that the average photographer would take, and I managed somehow to jump out of that and start innovating. And the moment it happened the first time was when I put a panoramic camera on my ski, and I suddenly discovered a whole new world of photography. When I managed to get one exposure on that camera before I broke the ski or broke the camera or something rather, in doing this in Sun Valley, but I sent the film off, and it came back with only one exposure on it, but that just busted wide open everything for me. Forget viewfinders, forget what Kodak says, don't worry about the sun being over your shoulder when you're taking a picture. Every package used to have that in it, young man. And from the time that I can remember until only a few years ago, the sun has to be over your shoulder when you take a picture. Well, I just threw out all inhibitions, all cliches in that one picture that I took cleared me, completely cleared the decks, and I was able to go on and do some quite remarkable things, such as put a camera in the middle of the football field. And it so happened that I knew Pete, what's her name?
Roselle?
I'd met Pete Roselle at going down to the Olympics in Australia, and he was appointed when he came back as commissioner, and Marshall Smith, who's head of the sports department, and I figured out this idea. And so we called up Pete Roselle, took him to lunch, I think, and said, hey, this will be a hell of a picture if you let us do it. And he said, do it. Well, you couldn't do it today. And
Tell me what did you do?
Oh, we put a panoramic camera on I put on a piece of plywood the size of this big, piece of plywood, a panoramic camera with a radio control to shoot off, take one photograph. And at kickoff time, I rushed out in the field and put it 18 inches away from the ball that was to be kicked at about a 45-degree angle, or less than that, 30-degree angle. He could just run by it, the guy. And then I went back, and when they blew the whistle, I pressed the radio as he was about to kick it. And then the linesman from the other side came across and picked it up and brought the camera to me. I had one exposure. This is what I mean, now will you understand what I said earlier about I'm always amazed when there's something on that film? It's a miracle. This was literally weeks of work to get on that field and do this. I had one exposure, and it made the double page fold-out cover for the magazine. I did the same thing at the Kentucky Derby. I talked them into, Marshall and I, not just me. I mean, please understand, if I say me, it means us. Generally speaking, it was me for the trout and the deer, but generally we had this wonderful group thing working. A lot of people say, oh, you can't work in a group. I say balls. We worked successfully together. And Marshall said, well, look, now you put the camera on
the America's Cup. Let's talk about the America's Cup and your approach to sailing and photographing sailing. What did you do differently?
I was a sailor when I was in New Zealand when I grew up and sailed an 18-footer. And so I was fascinated by the sport, and I was the skipper of my boat. And when the J boats in 1930, the late 30s, when Ranger beat when Ranger won during the last of the J boat races off Newport, I couldn't get enough pictures or reading. You couldn't read enough about them. I was very interested. So when they brought the America's Cup back with 12 meters in 1958, it was just automatic that I was now in the sports department. It was just automatic that I now become involved. And and the managing editor said, well, we've seen, like he had said earlier about skiing, when I wanted to go to Sun Valley and do a story on skiing, he said, oh, you just want to go and spend a lot of money and ski. He says, you can't take any different skiing pictures. It can't be done. They're taking the same pictures now they were in the 30s. They're still taking the same pictures. Well, I went out there and I told you how I took one picture that was different, and it set me off on a whole new train of thought. He said the same thing about the America's Cup. And he said, there's only a few of you damn Corinthians who have the slightest bit of interest in it. And I said, no. I said, that's not true. I said, I'll take you pictures that people out in Iowa will write letters about to you. And he says, impossible. He says, all sailing pictures are the same. Roosevelt's been taking sailing pictures. Roosevelt's father's been taking them. Young Roosevelt's been now taking them, and so on, and they're all the same. And I said, Ed, I'm going to go to Newport. He said, if you feel that way about it, it's your neck, you go. And so I went, and sure enough, the first letter that came in was from Iowa, from a school teacher. As a matter of fact, the letter came in and said, and said not only the pictures but the writing had become a thing for her class of compact descriptive writing. She thought it was good, and so I had it. So I was doing all right.
But the photographs, what did you do differently? How did you approach the boat?
Oh, how did I approach photographing 12 meters? I guess that I approached them like I did in most of the other outdoor stories that I did. I approached them as though I was skippering that boat, or I was on those skis, or I was on that surfboard, and I was probably the ultimate Walter Mitty, because I got myself so part of the scene. I became part of the scene, and was given in the America's Cup. I was given permission. I mean, they didn't give me permission. They welcomed me aboard anytime I wanted to come, and I even crewed on the boats a couple of times, not during races, but if they were short of a crew and practicing, they'd say, "Hey, come with us today," and I'd go and just crew with them, wouldn't take a camera, and because they needed help. And you understand that ABC wasn't up there, or anybody else. I was there by myself. And at the time of the actual races, then maybe one team would come up and take a few rolls of film, but there was never. Those were in the days when life was in its heyday, and to be a life photographer, you were given a lot of access. And the reason, of course, was you got tremendous. You were seen in the magazine in such a tremendous way, and so. And so, instead of having to go up there and produce, in 3 days, some pictures of the America's Cup, I went up there for the summer, and like I went to Sun Valley, and I came back when I finished, and I was up there. I rented a cottage, and I was there all summer. My family came up some of the time, and enabled me to literally think it through. And you've got to understand, you could go to Newport for 2 weeks and never see a boat because of the fog. When I say I was there all summer, you've got to understand they're not out every day. You could go up there for a month and not come back with any pictures very easily.
Where did you put the camera that was different, was unique?
On the 12 meters? Well, I mean, I didn't put the camera, I held the camera in most cases, but I wasn't looking through it very, very often. I just had the sense of that boat so much, and the sense of what I wanted. The opening picture, in the opening picture of the bow of Easterner, which is a beautiful varnished boat, varnished wooden boat. To get that picture, I suddenly had the idea, I had to have a picture of Easton to go in my story, in that story that they used. And she had had mast trouble, and I couldn't get her out there she wouldn't go out. She couldn't go out. And one weekend they called me up and said, "Hey, we're going to go out this weekend from Newport, come on up." And so I went up, and they went out, and they'd only got out just as far as the entrance to the bay at Newport, and the mast step came loose, which is what they'd been having trouble with. And so I was now up against a deadline for the story. I had to have a picture of Easterner that weekend. And so I just simply closed my eyes and thought, what can I do, what can I do, what can I do that will be good, that will be different? And I thought, so I walked up the bow, and I looked at got the bow and I looked back, and nothing. And then I looked down and saw the waves breaking. And I rushed back. I only had a few minutes to do it because they had turned around, we're heading back to the dock, and they'd be back in 3 or 4 minutes. And I grabbed a tripod and put my motorized Nikon on it with a 21mm lens and with an extension cable on it to release the motor, and lay down on the bow and just held it over the bow, not be able to see it, and shot and rode the camera up and down the waves like this, you see. Rode it up and down and shot the whole roll off, and then came back. And I came back, and the skipper said, "What the hell are you doing, George?" And I said, "I don't know." And once again, I'm amazed that something came out, and it came out and was the lead picture in the story, double page. And this is the way you had to operate to produce good pictures. And you had to be fast on your feet and sometimes quick in the mind, as in this case. If I hadn't got that picture, that story wouldn't have run, because there were the story was about the four boats that were fighting to be the defender against the British, the Australians, pardon me. And we couldn't have done a story on 3 of them. And it had to close on about Wednesday of the next week, and the boat wasn't operating. So
go ahead.
through being with the boat that long, when I had to produce, it all came together. If I'd only been up there for 3 days or 3 weeks, it wouldn't come together like that.
And life let you stay that long?
Nobody asked me questions. I could have stayed twice as long if I wanted to.
Tell me about when you heard that life was finally finishing.
I was in Nepal with my wife when I got word that life was going to fold, and I got a teletype from the picture editor that said, "Sorry, George, but the board has decided to fold the magazine," and it was signed "Regards." And so I sent back a message immediately. I was at the hotel door on the way out on a trek, and with all my gear, 2 taxi cabs full of gear. And I sent back a message immediately that said, "Your message of the 8th, badly garbled. Please send $500,000 for further expenses." And of course I never heard anything more. And neither did I expect to.
Final thoughts on Life magazine. How has Life magazine affected your career? What has it allowed you to do?
Well, I must say that Life magazine was absolutely the perfect place for me. I was there 30 years, which seems like a long time to be anywhere, I suppose, but it probably was exactly right for me, one of the few people that was exactly right for. And I realized somewhere along the line that, not in the beginning and not even in the middle, towards the end, that what had been happening really was that being, for me, not for everybody, for me, being on the staff of Life magazine was like having a extremely well-paid scholarship to photography in perpetuity, as long as I wanted it. And towards the end of the time that I was there, I regretted I hadn't made more use. I wish I'd had that thought earlier. I think I would have approached things maybe a little calmer than I did, and produced better essays, more thoughtful pictures, more thoughtful essays, and gone on further than I went. And so I don't know what more you could say about the place you worked for. My only regret is that now I'm retired and I own a 30-foot racing sloop, is that I didn't name it Henry. And I hope you can guess why.